Hey, all you cool cats and kittens. It's Anthony here. This morning we'll be continuing our study of the life of David. We'll be in 1 Samuel chapter 23, verses 1 through 14. I posted a link to a handout down below. And also, if you'd like to follow along with me in my notes, there's a link for that as well. And should you choose to do that, there's a cool map and a couple memes. All right. So as I said, this morning we'll be in 1 Samuel chapter 23. But since there's been a lot going on in David's life recently up until this point, I thought it'd be best if we did a little review to make sure we don't miss anything. Okay, so we'll be reviewing back to chapter 20, the beginning of this exile that we find David in today. All right, so back in chapter 20, we got our first glimpse of one of David's biggest faults that we'll continually see from him in the future, and that is that he is deceitful. All right, so if you don't remember, back in chapter 20, David's finally getting the hint that Saul hates him and is trying to kill him. So he goes to his best friend Jonathan, who is also Saul's son, and he asks Jonathan to lie for him. So Jonathan goes to his father, Saul, and he tries to defend David. He tries to remind his father that David is the next anointed king, but David has done no fault. There's no reason why Saul should be trying to kill him. This really angers Saul, and Saul publicly humiliates Jonathan in front of a lot of important people and disowns him for it. After that, Jonathan goes back to David, warns David that he's in great danger. It's been confirmed that his father wants to kill him, and he tells David he needs to flee. He needs to get out of town for the time being. So David flees to the tabernacle in Nob, and he's met by Ahimelech the priest. Ahimelech is immediately suspicious and asks David why he's traveling alone. All right, David was a really important person. He was married to one of Saul's daughters, so he is the son-in-law to the king, and he was also a very high-ranking commander in the Israelite army. So one would expect David to be traveling with some kind of entourage or retinue, but since he's on the run, he's traveling alone. Ahimelech notices that, and he's suspicious. He asks David why he's alone, and we see David lie again. David tells him that he's on a secret mission from Saul. And so David asks Ahimelech for supplies, and Ahimelech gives him food and the sword of Goliath, whom David had previously slain. This is in chapter 21. It also seems to cut randomly to a side note to mention that while this exchange between David and Ahimelech is going on, where Ahimelech is aiding David, that Doeg the Edomite, chief of Saul's herdmen, is there, and he witnesses this happen. Right. After that, David takes the supplies and the weapon that Ahimelech gave him, and he decides to travel to enemy territory, which was Goliath's own hometown, Gath. Right, if you don't remember, this was a kind of ridiculous decision for David to make, because he's carrying Goliath's weapon that he took from him the day he killed him, and he's taking this weapon that would be recognizable back to Goliath's own hometown in Gath. David was probably expecting them to offer him shelter or refuge, being that he is now a publicly known enemy of Saul, and they are enemies of Saul as well. But again, it's a ridiculous decision because he is fleeing to the enemies of God's people for safety. So David goes there. His plan doesn't work out at all. He is immediately recognized, captured, and taken to Achish, the king of Gath. And overcome with fear, realizing that he's been caught and he's in enemy territory alone, he pretends to be insane. Right? We see that he begins drooling on himself and scratching at things. And as he's drooling on himself in front of Achish, the king of Gath, This was a prime opportunity for the Philistines to just kill David and rid themselves of him once and for all, right? Because we've seen he's been quite a thorn in their side, and he's killed hundreds, even thousands of them. This is their opportunity to get rid of him. But it's not what the Lord has planned. We see that the Lord puts it into Achish's heart to simply have David sent away. Achish tells him, like, do I not have enough crazy people here that you need to bring me another? Send him out. And that's what they do. All right. And from there, the Lord directs David to encamp in the forest of Hereth. While he's there, Saul goes on a paranoid rant and starts accusing his servants of conspiring against him. While Saul is going on this rant, just accusing everybody, Doeg the Edomite finally comes forward, and he tells Saul that he saw Ahimelech the priest providing David with food and a weapon. And what does Saul do with that information? We see that Saul orders the total destruction of Nob and the complete slaughter of all the priests and their families. Right? And if you remember, this is a very sad moment, because one of the reasons why Saul had the kingdom taken away from him was his disobedience to completely destroy the Amalekites. Right? These enemies of God's people from day one, since during the Exodus. We see back then Saul failed to do that, but here he has no problem completely slaughtering entire families of priests, entire families of fellow Israelites, God's people. Thankfully, one of Ahimelech's sons, Abiathar, escapes, and he joins David. Right? And that leads us to where we are today in chapter 23. All right. So picking up in verse 1, we're told, now they told David, behold, the Philistines are fighting in Keilah, and are robbing the threshing floors. Alrighty. So the city of Keilah was located in the territory of Judah, less than 10 miles from the border with the Philistines, and approximately 15 miles from David's last reported location, which is in the forest of Hereth. Right. So being so close to the Philistine border, we see that the Philistines have invaded it and that they're robbing the threshing floors. So they're pillaging and ransacking the Israelites' source of food. All right. And David, we see, feels compelled to do something about it. So picking up in verse 2. Therefore David inquired of the Lord, shall I go attack these Philistines? And the Lord said to David, go and attack the Philistines and save Keilah. All right. This was a big, important decision for David to make, because he knows he needs to act, but it would be his small company of men. If you remember in previous chapters, it said that he had about 400 men right now. It would be him taking his 400 men out of their security, out of their hiding place, and going to go fight the entire Philistine army right now. Right? It would be his few hundred men against the entire Philistine army, and this would require them to leave their safety and expose their location to Saul. So this is a big decision for David to make. There's a lot of risk involved. There's a lot of danger involved. And how does David handle this decision? We see right here in verse 2, therefore David inquired of the Lord. Right? So that's your first blank. David seeks the Lord. Again, David has a big decision presented before him with a lot of danger and a lot of risk involved. And what we see him do here is that he takes this decision to the Lord. And God tells him, go and attack the Philistines and save Keilah. Picking up in verse 3. But David's men said to him, behold, we are afraid here in Judah. How much more then if we go to Keilah against the armies of the Philistines? Then David inquired of the Lord again, and the Lord answered him, arise, go down to Keilah, for I will give the Philistines into your hand. All right. So here David's men express their concern. with exposing their position to Saul and going up to face a largely outnumbering army. All right. This faintly echoes back to chapter 13, verses 8 and 9, when the Philistines have invaded and Saul's men become afraid and start deserting him. All right. And in order to appease them and abate their fear, is Saul commits this unlawful, illegal sacrifice, which is another one of the reasons why he got the kingdom taken from him. All right. So again, back then when we saw Saul do that, he disobeyed God, broke one of his laws to appease his men, right? Out of the fear of man, out of the fear of his men deserting him, Saul greatly disobeyed and broke a huge law. All right. Now David's sort of found himself in the same situation. Right? Philistines have invaded again, and they're largely outnumbered. And David's men express their concern. We can go help, but we'd be exposing our position, and we'd be going up against an enemy that is much larger than us. David's men show that they're afraid. And what's David's response to this as well? Again, we see verse 4, Then David inquired of the Lord again, and the Lord said to him, Arise, go down to Keilah, for I will give the Philistines into your hand. All right. So your next blank, number 2. Instead of fearing man like Saul did in 13, 8 through 9, David again seeks the Lord. Okay. Instead of acting rashly, which was one of Saul's biggest flaws, David here keeps a cool head. He doesn't act rashly. He doesn't act out of fear of a man. He takes this decision back to the Lord. Right, picking up in verse 5. And David and his men went to Keilah and fought with the Philistines and brought away their livestock and struck them with a great blow. So David saved the inhabitants of Keilah. Okay. So we see here David doesn't fight God's will. David obeys, and God gives him a great victory against a much larger army. Right, so that's your third blank. God commands David to act, and David obeys. Okay. David was presented with these decisions. He takes them to the Lord, and the Lord tells him what to do. And instead of fighting the Lord's will, David obeys it, and the Lord rewards him with a great victory against a much larger enemy. Picking up in verse 6. When Abiathar, the son of Ahimelech, had fled to David to Keilah, he had come down with an ephod in his hand. Now it was told Saul that David had come to Keilah. And Saul said, God has given him into my hand, for he has shut himself in by entering a town that has gates and bars. And Saul summoned all the people to war, to go down to Keilah, to besiege David and his men. All right. So Saul figures out that David's gone to Keilah, to this town that seems to have only one way in and one way out. And Saul thinks he has David cornered now. So Saul raises up. In verse 8, we see all the people to war, to go down to Keilah, to besiege David and his men. So verse 9. David knew that Saul was plotting harm against him, and he said to Abiathar the priest, Bring the ephod here. Then David said, O Lord, the God of Israel, your servant has surely heard that Saul seeks to come to Keilah to destroy the city on my account. Will the men of Keilah surrender me into his hand? Will Saul come down as your servant has heard? O Lord, the God of Israel, please tell your servant. Okay. So David's situation has suddenly become very desperate. He is cornered in the city with one way in and one way out. On one side, just a few miles down the road, is the territory of the Philistines. On the other side is Saul coming with the entire army. And within the city are the inhabitants, these people that he just rescued, who know that Saul's coming, and that Saul's probably going to destroy their city and all of them if they don't hand him over to David. All right, so David's pretty much trapped on all sides right now. But how does David handle the situation? How does David handle being overwhelmed and boxed in, trapped on all sides. We see in your fourth blank, David yet again seeks the Lord. Going back to verse 11. And the Lord said, he will come down. Speaking of Saul and his army. Verse 12. Then David said, will the men of Keilah surrender me and my men into the hand of Saul? And the Lord said, they will surrender you. Then David and his men, who were about 600, arose and departed from Keilah, and they went wherever they could go. When Saul was told that David had escaped Keilah, he gave up the expedition. And David remained in the strongholds in the wilderness, in the hill country of the wilderness of Ziph. And Saul sought him every day, but God did not give him into his hand. All right. So once again, David sought the Lord, obeyed his word, and the Lord blessed him by giving him an escape. All right. And the Lord further blesses him by continually giving him protection from Saul. It says right there at the end of verse 14, God did not give him into Saul's hand. All right. And then your fifth blank, the Lord rewards the obedience of those who seek him. And the conclusion of this ordeal is when David writes Psalm chapter 31, which I'll read really quick. All right. In you, O Lord, do I take refuge. Let me never be put to shame. In your righteousness, deliver me. Incline your ear to me, rescue me speedily. Be a rock of refuge for me, a strong fortress to save me. For you are my rock and my fortress, and for your name's sake you lead me and guide me. You take me out of the net they have hidden for me, for you are my refuge. Into your hand I commit my spirit. You have redeemed me, O Lord, faithful God. I hate those who pay regard to worthless idols, but I trust in the Lord. I will rejoice and be glad in your steadfast love, because you have seen my affliction. You have known the distress of my soul, and you have not delivered me into the hand of the enemy. You have set my feet in a broad place. Be gracious to me, O Lord, for I am in distress. My eye is wasted from grief, my body and my soul also. For my life is spent with sorrow, and my years with sighing. My strength fails because of my iniquity, and my bones waste away. Because all my adversaries I have become a reproach, especially to my neighbors, and an object of dread to my acquaintances. Those who seek me in the street flee from me. I have been forgotten like one who is dead. I have become like a broken vessel. For I hear the whispering of many, terror on every side, as they scheme together against me, as they plot to take my life. But I trust in you, O Lord. I say, you are my God. My times are in your hand. Rescue me from the hand of my enemies and from my persecutors. Make your face shine on your covenant. Save me in your steadfast love. O Lord, let not me be put to shame, for I call upon you. Let the wicked be put to shame. Lead them silently to Sheol. Let the lying lips be mute, which speak insolently against the righteous in pride and contempt. Oh, how abundant is your goodness, which you have stored up for those who fear you, and worked for those who take refuge in you, in the sight of the children of mankind. In the cover of your presence you hide them from the plots of men. You store them in your shelter from the strife of tongues. Blessed be the Lord, for he has wondrously shown his steadfast love to me when I was besieged in a city. I had said in my alarm, I am cut off from your side, but your voice heard my pleas for mercy when I cried to you for help. Love the Lord, all you his saints. The Lord preserves the faithful, but abundantly repays the one who acts in pride. Be strong, let your heart take courage, all you who wait for the Lord. All right, and this is a great response. So as we saw, David was in multiple very dire situations here. And in each of those situations, he took it to the Lord. Right? And the Lord blessed him for doing that. And the Lord blessed him for obeying him in each of those situations. All right. in your application. In this passage, we see David in multiple dire, dangerous situations. We see that in each of these situations, he sought the Lord, obeyed the Lord's instruction, and was blessed with victory and safety for it. We can learn from this great example of turning to the Lord in every situation and of the blessings that come from obeying his instruction. The act of seeking the Lord's will and applying that gained knowledge is called wisdom. It's the very last blank. All right. So, where do we find knowledge and wisdom and find out what to do when we're faced with these big decisions like David was here? Right? It all goes back to fearing the Lord. Right? And for that, I have a few verses from Proverbs written by David's son Solomon, the wisest and most knowledgeable man who ever lived. All right. Proverbs 1:7. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. All right. So it all goes back to fearing the Lord, and that's fearing the Lord literally and reverently. When you look at how this word for fear is used throughout the Old Testament, it's used in a literal context, a literal fear of the Lord, but it's also used in a reverential context, a reverential fear of the Lord. So the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. Proverbs 1:24-33. Because I have called and you refuse to listen, have stretched out my hand and no one has heeded, because you have ignored all my counsel and would have none of my reproof, I also will laugh at your calamity. I will mock when terror strikes you. When terror strikes you like a storm and your calamity comes like a whirlwind, when distress and anguish come upon you, then they will call upon me, but I will not answer. They will seek me diligently, but will not find me, because they hated knowledge and did not choose the fear of the Lord, would have none of my counsel, and despised all my reproof. Therefore they shall eat the fruit of their way, and have their fill of their own devices. For the simple are killed by their turning away, and the complacency of fools destroys them. But whoever listens to me will dwell secure, and will be at ease without dread of disaster. All right. So we see right here the dangers of disregarding and ignoring wisdom and knowledge. Right? That's not what David did here. We see David went to the Lord gave him instruction and knowledge, and David obeyed. Right? David heeded it. If David didn't obey, if David didn't heed the Lord's instructions, it probably would have turned out very differently for him here today. All right. Another great passage from Proverbs on the importance of seeking wisdom and heeding it is all of chapter 2. Chapter 3, verses 5-6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths. Chapter 3, verses 21-26. My son, do not lose sight of these. Keep sound wisdom and discretion, and they will be life for your soul and adornment for your neck. Then you will walk on your way securely, and your foot will not stumble. If you lie down, you will not be afraid. When you lie down, your sleep will be sweet. Do not be afraid of sudden terror or of the ruin of the wicked when it comes, for the Lord will be your confidence and will keep your foot from being caught. Proverbs 8:13-21. The fear of the Lord is the hatred of evil. Pride and arrogance and the way of evil and perverted speech I hate. I have counsel and sound wisdom. I have insight. I have strength. By me kings reign and rulers decree what is just. By me princes rule and nobles, all who govern justly. I love those who love me, and those who seek me diligently find me. Riches and honor are with me, and enduring wealth and righteousness. My fruit is better than gold, even fine gold, in my yield than choice silver. I walk in the way of righteousness, in the paths of justice, granting inheritance to those who love me, and filling their treasuries. All right, this speaks of the blessings that come with pursuing wisdom and knowledge, and not ignoring it, but heeding it and applying it. Proverbs 10:29. The way of the Lord is a stronghold to the blameless, but destruction to evildoers. Proverbs 12:15. The way of a fool is right in his own eyes, but a wise man listens to advice. Right? That's what Saul did. Saul's decisions, his rash, prideful, arrogant, fear of man-based decisions were right in his own eyes, but they were foolish decisions. But a wise man listens to advice. That's what David did. David sought the counsel and the advice of the Lord, and he listened to it. Proverbs 13:13. Whoever despises the word brings destruction on himself. Be he who reveres the commandment will be rewarded. Again, another contrast between what Saul did and what David did. Proverbs 13:17. A wicked messenger falls into trouble, but a faithful envoy brings healing. Proverbs 14:6-7. A scoffer seeks wisdom in vain, but knowledge is easy for a man of understanding. Leave the presence of a fool, for there you do not meet words of knowledge. Proverbs 14:12. There is a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the way of death. Proverbs 14:26-27. In the fear of the Lord one has strong confidence, and his children will have a refuge. The fear of the Lord is a fountain of life, that one may turn away from the snares of death. Proverbs 16:1-3. The plans of the heart belong to man, but the answer of the tongue is from the Lord. All the ways of a man are pure in his own eyes, but the Lord weighs the spirit. Commit your work to the Lord, and your plans will be established. Proverbs 16:9. The heart of a man plans his way, but the Lord establishes his steps. Proverbs 18:1-2. Whoever isolates himself seeks his own desire. He breaks out against all sound judgment. A fool takes no pleasure in understanding, but only in expressing his opinion. This is something that we've been seeing from Saul continually. Proverbs 19:20-21. Listen to advice and accept instruction, that you may gain wisdom in the future. Many are the plans in the mind of a man, but it is the purpose of the Lord that will stand. Proverbs 19:27. Cease to hear instruction, my son, and you will stray from the words of knowledge. That's what happened to Saul. Proverbs 20:18. Plans are established by counsel, by wise guidance, wage war. This is what David did, literally, in this passage. Proverbs 21:1-2. A king's heart is a stream of water in the hand of the Lord. He turns it wherever he will. Every way of a man is right in his own eyes, but the Lord weighs the heart. Verses 30-31. No wisdom, no understanding, no counsel can avail against the Lord. The horse is made ready for the day of battle, but the victory belongs to the Lord. Again, this is exactly what happened today in this passage. Proverbs 24:3-6. By wisdom a house is built, and by understanding it is established. By knowledge the rooms are filled with all precious and pleasant riches. A wise man is full of strength, and a man of knowledge enhances his might. For by wise guidance you can wage your war, and in abundance of counselors there is victory. And then 26:12. Do you see a man who is wise in his own eyes? There is more hope for a fool than for him. All right. Proverbs is great, and it's very black and white on what the things that the fools and the wicked say and do, and the things that the wise and the righteous say and do. Right? And if you take all that, like we just did right now, and you look at David's life, you see that Saul falls into the foolish and wicked category in a lot of the Proverbs, and David falls into the wise and righteous category. Right? And this is because, again, like we saw today, David sought the Lord and obeyed the Lord's instruction and was blessed for it. Right? Again, that's called wisdom. Right? So a big one that you tend to hear in small groups is a prayer request for wisdom. There's a prayer request for wisdom in situations with relationships, in situations with conflict. Something that we hear a lot in our small groups, I'm sure that you can agree with that. And so because of that, this is how we find wisdom. This is how we find the answers of what to do in those situations, right? We go to the Lord, we go to His Word, and when we learn from that, we apply. Again, that's wisdom, knowledge applied. And then from the verses we saw in Proverbs this morning, all right, the Lord blesses those who obey Him and obey His word. The Lord blesses those who go to Him and heed what He has to say and heed His instruction. All right. With that, we're going to pray. All right, dear Father, we thank You for this morning and for Your word and for this passage and for this great, stellar example of what it looks like to go to You in every situation. And we thank You for showing us how You bless us when we go to You and obey what You have us to do and apply it. Father, I pray that this is what we would do in all situations of life, that we would go to You, that we would go to Your word and obey You in Your word and do what You would have us to do. Father, I pray that You would just put to death that pride and that arrogance inside of us that drives us to seek our own answers, that drives us to fear man and act on that. Father, I pray that You just give us desire for You, for Your word, and for Your guidance and instruction. And again, Father, we thank You so much for being faithful and for faithfully blessing those who go to You and seek You and obey You. In Your Son's name I pray, amen.